I always start with a little routine, reminding myself to breathe, to focus, maybe even to smile before diving into the day. It's nothing dramatic, just a quiet habit. But that morning, something felt different. Heavier. My thoughts were a mess. I didn't know where to begin or even how to begin. All I knew was that something inside me was unraveling, and I couldn't ignore it anymore. And then, as if the universe heard me, there was a knock. It was soft at first. 2 taps, almost hesitant. I sat frozen in my chair, a cup of untouched tea growing cold in my hands. I wasn't expecting anyone. I rarely did these days. Life had grown quiet around me, like a room where someone had pulled the plug and dimmed the lights. Another knock, this time firmer. I stood slowly, every step toward the door echoing louder than the last. When I opened it, I was stunned. It was Jason, the quiet man from next door. The one who nodded politely but never lingered. The one I'd seen countless times but barely spoken to. He was holding something. A paper bag, warm and fragrant. And the way he looked at me, not with pity, but with something else. Something calm. Something knowing. "Hey, Evelyn," he said gently, using my name for the first time. "I thought you might need this." And just like that, the silence I'd been living in cracked. What he brought me that day wasn't just soup. It was something far deeper. Quiet gesture that would ripple through every corner of my life. And this is how everything began to change. I stood there for a second too long, not quite sure what to say. The steam from the bag in Jason's hands curled into the air between us, carrying with it the scent of something warm, comforting. Like memories I hadn't let myself feel in a while. I reached out slowly, taking the bag from him as if it might disappear. I was still trying to mask the lump in my throat when he added, "Homemade chicken soup. Nothing fancy. Just thought it might help." "Thank you," I whispered, but my voice cracked in the middle, betraying me. Jason gave a soft nod, that same quiet smile still on his face. "If you ever need anything, talk, company, anything, just knock," he said. "We're neighbors after all." And then he turned and walked away, leaving me standing in the doorway, holding more than just soup. When I finally closed the door and sank into the nearest chair, I stared at the bag in my lap for a long time. I couldn't tell if it was the soup that warmed me, or the fact that someone had noticed, that someone had seen me. Because the truth was, I hadn't been okay for a while. My body had started betraying me. Subtle aches that turned into relentless pain, fatigue that clung to my skin like a second layer. But it wasn't just the physical toll. It was the slow erosion of me. I stopped going out. I stopped answering calls. Even when my sister visited, I kept the conversations short. I convinced myself I was just tired, but deep down, I knew it was more. I was fading, until that knock, until Jason. And suddenly, I began to wonder, was this just a kind gesture or the start of something I didn't even know I needed? The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. The bag Jason had brought still sat on the counter, the soup now neatly stored in my fridge, though I hadn't touched it yet. But something had shifted. I found myself listening for sounds from outside, his footsteps maybe, or the quiet creak of his porch steps. Silly, I thought. He was just being kind. A neighborly gesture, nothing more. But still, I kept thinking about it. I'd grown used to being invisible. Not in some dramatic, tragic way, but slowly, day by day, I had disappeared behind excuses and exhaustion, and nobody had noticed. At least I thought no one had. Until Jason. Later that afternoon, I heated up the soup. The scent filled the kitchen, soft and rich, and I swear, it tasted like something I hadn't felt in years. Care. I ate slowly, each spoonful loosening something in me that had been clenched tight for too long. That evening, I sat by the window again. The garden outside had grown wild, patches of weeds climbing through the flowers I once loved tending. I stared out at it, a blanket draped over my shoulders, and wondered, when had I stopped seeing beauty in the world? That's when I saw him, Jason, watering his front lawn with that same quiet grace he always carried. He glanced up and caught my eye. We both froze for half a second before he lifted his hand and waved. And I waved back. It was a small thing, barely a flicker of movement. But in that moment, something began to bloom again inside me. Not hope, not yet, but the space for it. That night, I couldn't sleep, not because of pain or even the usual restlessness, but because of something quieter, something gentler. My thoughts kept circling back to Jason's words. If you ever need anything, we're neighbors after all. It wasn't just the offer. It was the fact that he'd noticed. I had spent so long convincing myself that no one could see through the smile I put on, the polite nods, the "I'm fine" I tossed out like confetti. But Jason had. He saw me. Really saw me. And didn't look away. He didn't ask for an explanation or try to fix anything. He simply showed up. With soup. And that meant more than I could put into words. I sat at my kitchen table the next morning, fingers curled around a cup of tea gone lukewarm, and stared at the sunlight dancing across the floor. For the first time in a long while, the silence in the house didn't feel so suffocating. It felt full, like it was holding something new. Something I hadn't let in for a while. Possibility. I thought of all the ways I'd pulled away, ignored phone calls, skipped gatherings, let birthdays pass with only a text. It was easier to drift than to admit how lost I felt. But Jason's knock had interrupted that drift. His quiet presence had reminded me that sometimes connection doesn't come in fireworks. It comes in whispers, in warmth, in a paper bag of soup offered without condition. And as strange as it sounds, I think that was the moment the world stopped feeling so cold. All because someone chose to knock. The days that followed felt lighter, not dramatically so. I didn't wake up cured, and the aches in my joints still greeted me every morning like uninvited guests. But the heaviness in my chest, the one I hadn't even realized I was carrying, had eased. Just enough for me to breathe a little deeper. Just enough to notice things again. Like the way the sunlight filtered through the kitchen window, or how the wind carried the scent of blooming jasmine from my garden, which was still half wild, but now strangely beautiful. And I noticed Jason more and more. He didn't push or hover. He simply appeared, watering his plants, bringing in his mail, passing by with a nod and the occasional smile. But something had shifted. There was a quiet understanding now, as if we shared some invisible thread that gently tugged us closer each day. Sometimes we exchanged a wave from across the yard. Other times, a few words about the weather or the sound of birds returning to the neighborhood trees. They were small moments, ordinary moments. But they anchored me. They reminded me I wasn't invisible. Not anymore. Then, one particular evening, something unexpected happened. I was sitting by the window again, the fading sunlight turning my living room gold. For the first time in weeks, I felt like myself. Just a little. My body hurt less. My mind felt clearer. And then, there it was again. A knock. Soft, but familiar. And I knew before I even stood, it was him. And somehow that quiet knock didn't just sound like a neighbor visiting. It sounded like hope returning. When I opened the door, I was ready this time. No hesitation, no startled blink, just a quiet smile that formed before I could stop it. And there he was. Jason, standing on my porch, holding a small woven basket in both hands. This time it wasn't soup. It was fruit. Fresh, colorful, vibrant. Apples, pears. And were those peaches? I thought you might like something fresh, he said, voice soft but steady. I picked these up at the market this morning. Figured they might brighten your day. I reached for the basket, the scent of ripe peaches rising with the summer air. Jason, you really don't have to keep bringing me things, I said, though my voice lacked conviction. Because the truth was, I didn't want him to stop. He gave a humble shrug, eyes warm. I know, but I want to. There was a pause, the kind that isn't awkward, just real. A breath between two people navigating something new and unspoken. You've been kind of quiet lately, he added, almost as an afterthought. But then he looked at me, really looked, and his expression shifted. His smile faded, replaced by something deeper, more careful, more vulnerable. "Evelyn," he said gently, "are you okay? I mean, really okay?" The question landed with the weight of 1,000 unspoken thoughts. No one had asked me that in a long time. Not like that. Not in a way that made me feel seen instead of pitied. I stood there, basket in hand, heart thudding in my chest, unsure whether to answer or fall apart. I didn't know how to answer him. Jason's question hung in the air like mist, gentle but impossible to ignore. "Are you okay? I mean, really okay?" No one had asked me that with such sincerity before. At least, not in a way that made me feel like I could tell the truth. So instead of replying, I stepped aside. "Would you like some tea?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He nodded. No questions, no pressure. Just a quiet understanding in his eyes as he stepped into my small, nap-time-worn kitchen. I filled the kettle and moved through the motions with the kind of muscle memory you don't forget, even when everything else inside you feels foreign. He sat at the kitchen table, his presence steady and calm, while I reached for the old mugs that hadn't been used in weeks, maybe months. We spoke at first about simple things: neighborhood gossip, the stubborn summer heat, the peaches in the basket. But beneath it all, his question still echoed in the silence between sentences. Finally, I exhaled. "I don't know," I said, eyes fixed on the rising steam from my cup. "I think I've been struggling more than I've admitted, even to myself." Jason didn't speak. He just listened. And in that silence, I felt something begin to loosen in my chest. "It's not just the pain or the fatigue," I continued. "It's the everything. The isolation, the feeling like I've been disappearing little by little, like I'm watching my life from behind glass." He looked at me then, not with pity, but with something gentler, something honest. "You don't have to go through this alone," he said softly. "I know it's not easy, but I'm here, even if it's just to sit or listen. You don't have to pretend." And in that moment, I didn't. I let the quiet hold us. 2 mugs, 2 people, and, for the first time in a long while, no mask. In the days after that conversation, something between us quietly shifted. Jason didn't press for more, and I didn't offer it. But there was a new rhythm now, unspoken but deeply felt. A sort of gentle gravity that pulled us closer, moment by moment, word by word. We still talked about simple things: garden weeds, overripe tomatoes, the odd cat that kept wandering across our driveways. But underneath those words was something else, something tender. Something that felt like possibility. I found myself looking forward to seeing him. Just a glimpse of him stepping out with his watering can or carrying groceries was enough to lift the fog that still lingered in my mind. Sometimes he waved. Sometimes he smiled. Sometimes he just looked up and nodded, like he knew I was watching from behind the curtains and didn't mind. And strangely, I didn't mind either. Then, one warm evening, I was in the garden again. It had been a good day. My knees didn't ache quite as much, and the sun had wrapped around me like a quiet embrace. I had pruned the roses, really pruned them, not just stared at them. I even found myself humming, like I used to. As the sky softened into dusk, a thought kept tugging at me. I wonder what Jason's doing. I wiped the dirt from my hands and followed the thought, down the path, past the gate, and right up to his front door. I didn't need anything. I didn't even know what I was going to say. But when I knocked and he opened the door, surprise flickered across his face, then softened into something warmer. "I was just thinking about you," I said before I could stop myself. And for a moment we both stood there. 2 neighbors, yes, but also 2 souls slowly stepping into something neither of us had expected. Jason stepped aside and gestured for me to come in. His house was quiet, comfortably so. The kind of quiet that holds space, not emptiness. I followed him into the living room. my fingers brushing against the soft fabric of my sleeves as I sat down on the same couch I'd seen from across our fences for years but had never imagined myself sitting on. We talked. Casual, harmless topics. The neighbors. The overgrown ivy on my back fence. The hummingbird that kept teasing his porch flowers. But even as we laughed, something was different. There was an energy in the air, not tense, but charged, like something unsaid had pulled up a chair between us and was patiently waiting its turn. Then, in a rare moment of silence, Jason leaned forward. His elbows rested on his knees, his fingers laced tightly, and his gaze, usually warm and steady, was now searching. "Evelyn," he said slowly, "there's something I need to tell you. Something I've been thinking about for a while." My heart skipped. Just once. A sharp flutter that landed somewhere deep. "I've been thinking about us. About how things have been," he continued, voice quieter now, more vulnerable. "And I can't shake the feeling that there's something more here. Between us. I don't know what to call it yet, but I feel it." His words weren't dramatic. They weren't rehearsed. They were raw and honest. Spoken not to impress, but to reveal. "I know we haven't known each other that long," he added, "but I'd hate to pretend this connection doesn't exist." I sat frozen, not out of fear, but out of the sudden realization that everything he said, I had been feeling too. I just hadn't dared name it. Until now. I stared at him. Not because I was shocked by what he said, but because hearing it out loud made everything suddenly real. I had felt the shift too, the quiet, unspoken current that hummed between us with every smile, every pause, every knock at my door, but I had buried it beneath layers of hesitation, fear, grief, and now here it was, sitting in the space between us, no longer invisible. "I never expected this," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I wasn't looking for anything, especially not now. I've been through so much, Jason. I don't know if I'm ready to open that part of myself again." His expression didn't change. He didn't flinch. He just listened. His eyes kind, steady, and patient, in a way that made me feel like I wasn't being judged for being unsure. "I understand, Evelyn," he said softly. "I'm not asking for anything right now. I needed you to know how I feel. This isn't just some passing thing for me. I care about you, more than I thought I would. And maybe you feel something too, even if you're not quite ready to say it." His honesty felt like a wave, gentle but unstoppable. It didn't crash into me. It moved through me, quietly pulling pieces of me back to life. I swallowed hard, trying to find words in the storm of emotions rising in my chest. "I don't know what to say," I finally managed. "I never thought I'd be in this place again. But I do care about you, Jason. I really do." And then something simple but extraordinary happened. He reached out and took my hand, not possessively, not with urgency, just presence. Warm, steady, certain. "I'm not going anywhere," he said, and for the first time in a very long while, I believed it. After that night, something inside me shifted. It wasn't dramatic. There were no violins playing, no cinematic glow around us. Just a quiet sense of relief. A peace I hadn't felt in years, like I had finally set down a weight I didn't realize I'd been carrying. Jason didn't try to define anything. He didn't label what was growing between us or ask for more than I could give. Instead, he simply showed up. Every day, in small ways. He came by with fresh bread from the market. He helped trim the stubborn vines crawling across my fence. Sometimes we just sat on the porch and said nothing at all. And somehow, that was enough. It wasn't about grand gestures. It wasn't even about romance. Not yet. It was about presence. About trust. About feeling safe again. In my own skin, in someone else's company, in this strange, delicate thing that was quietly blooming between us. Then one evening, we decided to go out. Our first real date, though neither of us called it that. It was just dinner. Nothing fancy. A little bistro down the road I'd always liked but hadn't visited in years. I suggested it, partly to challenge myself. Jason agreed without hesitation, and I could tell by the look in his eyes that he was proud of me for stepping out. We sat across from each other at a small table by the window, sharing bites and laughter and soft, lingering glances. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt like a woman again, not just someone surviving, but someone slowly, quietly beginning to live. After dinner, we didn't want the evening to end. The food had been simple, the conversation even simpler, but there was a rhythm to it, a gentle flow that made everything feel right. No awkward silences, no reaching for things to say, just comfort, ease. We stepped out into the cool night air, the streetlights casting soft pools of gold across the sidewalk. The city was quiet, humming softly in the distance, like a lullaby for grown-ups who had learned to live with noise. We walked without a destination, our steps slow, unhurried. Sometimes we brushed shoulders, sometimes our hands drifted too close, but neither of us moved away. There was something fragile in the air, not in a bad way, more like something precious, something not to be rushed. After a while, Jason broke the silence. "I'm glad we're doing this," he said, voice low and sincere. "I know it's still early, and I know things are complicated, but I feel like we're building something real, Evelyn." I stopped walking for a moment, just to look at him. He wasn't saying it to impress me. There was no performance in his tone, no pressure, just honesty. And it struck me how rare that was, to be looked at without expectation. "I feel the same," I replied softly. "I didn't expect any of this. I didn't even think I wanted it. But now that it's here, I realize it might be exactly what I needed." Jason turned toward me, his eyes reflecting the soft glow of the street lamp, and gently brushed a loose strand of hair from my face. "You don't have to be afraid anymore," he said. "Whatever happens, we'll figure it out together." And in that moment, I believed him.